Greetings and salutations. This is Abdelhadi with the Bitter Truth, where we may not have all the answers, but we're going to ask an awful lot of questions. You can also become a Patreon person by going to patreon.com/The Bitter Truth, where you can become a bitter pill or a spoonful of sugar and honestly make your life better. Today, my guest is a friend of the show. So excited to have him back on. Miko Peled, who has been an activist for quite a while now. He's pro-Palestinian activist, I like to say, because he genuinely has dived into that cause and has been there for the Palestinian people in so many ways that even most Arabs can't even fathom. He's the author of The General Sun, Journey of an Israeli in Palestine. He's also the author of Injustice, the story of the Holy Land Foundation 5. He's been on the show before, and he's back on today. Miko, are you there?
I am.
How have you been, sir?
I've been very well, thank you. How about you?
I'm great, man. Austin's treating me well, and just been, doing the thing and working and doing the show. No real drama to speak of, except for people that don't like me. That's okay.
That's terrible. Why would anybody not like you?
Oh well, people disagree with you, that kind of thing. It's not like they don't like me. It's just they just kind of don't see the point of that kind of thing. But hey, man, so you're in D.C. What's going on in D.C.?
Well, I've been living here for the last year or so, or a couple of years, I should say, more than a year. What's going on? Lots going on. I mean, there's always activities. Congress has become a pretty interesting thing for people like us, because there's a great woman like Ilhan Omar, who has got John Lewis and Rashid Tlaib to co-sponsor a bill to enshrine and safeguard the right of Americans to boycott. Because right now, Americans are being penalized for their desire to boycott Israel.
Right.
And so this new bill says basically the Americans have a right to boycott as a means of, nonviolent resistance to oppression and injustice everywhere. So it's great that John Lewis, who's an icon of the civil rights movement, joined in and co-sponsored with her. And it's kind of a generational thing, I think. He's kind of the old guard, she's the new guard.
Right.
So I think that's very, very, very cool. And it's great to have her, Rashida and AOC, in Congress. It just changes everything. And there is a lot going on. The whole boycott BDS movement, pros, the people that are pro it, the people that are against it. There's a lot of conversation about it, a lot of discussion. Good discussion. More and more people, I think, are understanding why it's important and supporting it. I go everywhere with this bag of BDS buttons, little pins that say BDS on them.
Yeah.
And I give them away, and people just can't get enough of them, so that's great. And I'm all over the country, actually, with those pins. Everywhere I go and give a lecture, I bring a bag, and before the lecture begins, everybody's wearing them. So people get it. I think people understand. Even here in Washington, D.C., which is really a pro-Israel, the bastion of pro-Israeli politics.
Sure.
In D.C., people are getting that, you can't tell people they can't boycott. It's their right to boycott. And on this particular issue, it's not only their right to boycott, I think it's their responsibility to boycott Israel and demand the whole BDS boycott, divestment, and sanctions to be imposed on Israel. So, good, I think good things are happening. I mean, it's a tough gig. This is a tough issue, but good things are happening.
See, and two points I want to make to that. First of all, I don't understand why it should be a tough issue at all. We have freedom of speech in this country, the First Amendment, which is coincidentally before the Second Amendment. But then the other part of it is, what chance do you think, since it wasn't unanimous, but it was a pretty big vote in both houses of Congress to pass that stupid resolution? They were very enthusiastic about passing that anti-BDS resolution. So how do you think it's going to go down for Omar and Tlaib to get this bill down the road?
Well, you're right. In other words, when the Senate was passing S1 back in January, this was a bill, especially a bill that has anything that has to do with supporting Israel. It's usually bipartisan, and it's a no-brainer. In this case, because there was a portion in it that was going against the right of Americans to boycott Israel or boycott at all. You have, super Israeli supporters. The junior senator from Maryland, just not far from here, Chris Van Hollen.
Right.
He was saying, I love Israel, I support Israel. We cannot tell Americans they cannot boycott. It is unconstitutional. He gave a great 29-minute speech, which is worth listening to on YouTube, explaining why this is going too far. I mean, supporting Israel is one thing, telling Americans that and penalizing Americans and American businesses when they call for boycott is unconstitutional. Besides being morally wrong, it's unconstitutional. Every time these laws, on the state level have been taken to court, have been tested, the courts always found them to be unconstitutional and threw them out. So it's a big change when you have pro-Israeli supporters, really like staunch pro-Israeli, and even John Lewis was a staunch pro-Israeli representative, are coming out and saying, no, Americans have a right to boycott. It's our right. It's one of the ways in which we fight injustice, not only in this country, but in any country. So that is a big change. You're absolutely right. The conversation here is definitely shifted, and it's not as easy to pass these laws because a lot of the members of Congress are realizing it's unconstitutional. It's a freedom of speech issue. So that's the direction we want this to go right now, and that's pretty good. And as for the bill itself, that Ilhan Omar and John Lewis stand behind, trying to defend the right of Americans to boycott, we'll have to wait and see. I mean, it's a tough call because even though it doesn't mention Israel or Palestine, everybody knows about that. And members of Congress, we'll see what happens. I think a lot of them are still scared to touch this issue.
Right.
And on top of that, there's also the No Way to Treat a Child, the Defense Children bill that Betty McCollum reintroduced, which talks about not making sure that American funds don't go to Israeli facilities that detain and torture children. That's another one that should be a no-brainer, but members of Congress are scared to come close to it because it actually outlines the ways in which Israel detains and tortures children. It's in the bill. It's a very good bill.
Right.
And so they're afraid to touch it, but we got to put pressure on them to do so. It's the right thing to do.
Well, and really quick for the listener, so because I saw a tepid response from Tulsi Gabbard, for example. She defended her vote to vote for that resolution. And so what's the difference between a resolution and an actual bill that they're trying to sign into law?
Well, it's a bill, and then it's called a resolution, but we have to wait until it gets to a vote and until you have enough sponsors. So I mean, there are a lot of stages along the way. I mean, I think a winner would be if there were 100 co-signers on the bill. That would create attention. The press, people would have to start talking about it. But even if it had a great deal of support, it still has to be brought to a vote. And so bringing it to a vote is a political act that I don't think anybody in Congress has the courage to follow through on. But at least to have a good number of supporters would demand that the press and everybody else pay attention to it.
Right. Well, I mean,
that's where we are right now.
Well, then, I mean, see, I remember when I first talked to you last summer, and we were talking about how the apartheid movement, or how the anti-apartheid movement went down in South Africa, and you made a really great point. You said, well, we were backing Vietnam until we weren't, and we backed South Africa until we weren't. It just seems like there's so much more money and juice behind the Israelis. It might be fading. AIPAC's grip. I've been reading different articles on how they're losing more and more young people because more and more young people are getting more alerted to the fact that it is an apartheid state. It's you can't have a democracy and a theocracy at the same time. That's just incongruous. They just recently, about a month and a half ago, destroyed 70 apartments of Palestinians. And with a straight face saying, even better will work, a couple weeks back was saying, yeah, we can't have a two-state solution. How can you have a two-state solution? Where's the other state going to be? I mean, it's just this lie of a two-state solution to mollycoddle the so-called liberal in this country. I mean, how do these congressional leaders do that with a straight face? I still see them say that.
Well, how they do it with a straight face. I mean, being a politician, you have to get used to doing a lot of things that are not true, and then say one thing with a straight face, and then know that you're not telling the truth. I mean, that's part of it. That's kind of goes with the territory, unfortunately. But they say it because they're afraid. They're scared to be labeled anti-Semitic. They're scared that the AIPAC will start supporting somebody else and they'll lose their job, and so forth. And they know the truth. I mean, it's not that they're stupid. They know the truth. They know that there can never be a two-state solution. But they also know that if they the only way for politicians in America to support the Palestinian cause is to fall back on a two-state solution, and even that is considered extreme. Because if they tell the truth, which is that there cannot be an apartheid state of Israel anywhere in Palestine without trampling over the Palestinian rights, then all hell will break loose, and they'll be called anti-Semitic and all kinds of things like that.
Mm-hmm.
So they fall back on the most comfortable solution, or the most comfortable soundbite, which is, oh yeah, we believe in a two-state solution. Then you look at the details and you say, well, but under the best of circumstances, the most liberal-leaning Israeli government has always said the two-state solution the Palestinian state will not include the expanded boundaries of Jerusalem, the big settlement block, and the entire Jordan River Valley. That in itself is about half of the West Bank. The Palestinians are going to get half of a portion of Palestine, which Israel determined to begin with, and Israel doesn't even call it that. It's not even called the West Bank anymore. It's called Judean Samaria.
Right.
So, I mean, it's complete nonsense, but people listen to the soundbite, and they don't worry about the details. And that's how they get away with it. That's how they can say, well, yeah, two-state solution, knowing full well that nobody has any intention whatsoever of ever allowing it to happen.
See, and then Jared Kushner, I think last week I saw that he's putting together another summit to come up with a peace process, and there's no Netanyahu, there's no Abbas, there's no Hezbollah, there's no Hamas, there's nothing. There's just a bunch of complicit Arabs and the White House. What are they trying to get done with this meeting? What's the purpose of even having a meeting?
That's a very good question. I mean, we'd have to ask him. I don't think anybody understands why the only reason people show up to these meetings is because he's the president's son-in-law, and he's got a lot of money, and people want to do business with him. That's the only. There's nothing else that's there, and he's got nothing to offer. It's certainly not a peace plan. The entire deal of the century, I think, has already fallen on its face pretty badly.
Yeah.
Because everybody understands it's not a plan. It's basically, maybe it is a plan, but the end game is to give Israel everything it wants and give nothing to the Palestinians. In other words, complete capitulation of the Palestinians and a complete victory to Israel on all issues. Well, that's not going to fly, and you don't need a summit for that. You just let Israel keep doing what it's doing and move on. So you don't need a summit. You don't need a process. You don't need a talk. You just do it, and that's really what's been happening. So if it's moving the American embassy to Jerusalem and recognizing Jerusalem as the capital of Israel, if it's the United States declaring that Israel has sovereignty over the Syrian Golan Heights, if it's pulling money out of the United Nations, UNRWA, the United Nations Refugee Agency, if it's closing the Palestinian, for good, closing the Palestinian representation of the Palestinian mission here in Washington, D.C., there is no more mission. So in other words, step by step, this is the deal of the century. They're erasing Palestine and Palestinian representation, and they're erasing the refugees. So for all practical purpose, this is, Bibi Netanyahu wrote this plan. There's no question about that. Kushner is just the guy that's executing it. But that's basically what it is. It's complete capitulation of the Palestinian and complete victory to Israel. And it's not going to fly because Palestinians are not disappearing.
Right.
They're not going to disappear, and they're not going to stop fighting.
Well, see, and then this is, I was talking to somebody the other night, and one of the things I don't understand the logic of, because it just does nothing but, unless this is what they want, why is Gaza Gaza? I mean, they cleared the settlers out in 2005, and they voted for a government that, the United States and Israel did not like, voting for Hamas to run things. And so why insist on keeping that open-air prison as is? I mean, these people it's nothing short of torture. They're having, food, medicine, you name it, denied them. And the blame is terrorism. Well, maybe they wouldn't be maybe they wouldn't be fighting if they had rights and if they were at least allowed to work in Israel. I mean, why Gaza?
Well, it's part of a bigger strategy. I mean, why is there a Gaza Strip to begin with? Israel created the Gaza Strip. There's no natural boundaries to the Gaza Strip. It's not a natural piece of, geographic territory. After Israel was established in the late 40s, and then throughout the early 50s, they were kicking out hundreds of thousands of Palestinians out of Palestine. And the people who lived in the towns and villages, hundreds of them, in southern Palestine, were all had to be driven somewhere. So they built refugee camps around the city of Gaza, created a neutral line and said, we're going to call this the Gaza Strip. And this is where the refugees are going to go. The majority of the people who live in the Gaza, 2.5 million or so people who live there now, most of them are refugees. Their homes are on the other side of the fence. Their homes are in other parts. Their lands, their homes, their water, their fields, their crops, everything is on the other side of the fence. So they've been there for more than 70 years now.
Right.
Them, their kids, their children, their grandchildren. And Israel wants them to die. There is no other explanation. Other than shooting people, the only other sure way to kill people is to deny them water, which is what they're doing there. They're denying them water. They're killing them. They're denying them nutrition. There's calorie count. And they bomb them every so often and exact a terrible toll of casualties in Gaza. And those thousands who are injured have nowhere to go because Israel denies them access to proper medical facilities. So it's genocide. It's an attempt to kill them all, kill them slowly but surely. And then when you listen to Israeli cabinet ministers, they will tell you they have a plan. Palestinians can have three choices. They can leave. They can stay as residents with no rights, or they can fight and die. This is coming out of the Israeli cabinet. This is coming out of the Israeli government. This is not some hallucinating crazy fanatic thing. This is mainstream conversation in Israel now.
Right.
So there's no consideration whatsoever for Palestinian rights or the life of Palestinians, children or adults. And that's what the Gaza Strip is. It's a concentration camp, and the intent is to get them to die. And the thing is, they claim that there's terrorism. They claim that there's a threat. There's never been a tank ever in the Gaza Strip.
Right.
Israel's got one of the largest and most sophisticated and well-equipped armies in the world. I call it the best equipped and the best financed terrorist organization in the world. Mm-hmm. The Gaza Strip, the poor refugees in the Gaza Strip have never posed a threat to Israel. That's complete nonsense. But they have to do something. If they do nothing, they look bad. Fix the problem they don't want, because fixing the problem means allowing people to go back to their homes, rebuilding their homes, rebuilding their towns and villages, and paying restitution for 7 decades of torture. Israel doesn't want to do that.
Right.
So somebody figured out that they can kill them, shoot them, bomb them, imprison them, and then say it's their fault for being terrorists. And it works. The whole world is watching this and allowing it to happen. Children die, young children in the Gaza Strip die of curable diseases. And they live 10, 15-minute drive from some of the best healthcare facilities, but Israel won't give them access.
Right.
These healthcare facilities are near where these people came from. There are other parts of Palestine, but Israel won't give them access. So children are dying in the Gaza Strip as we speak, living 20-minute drive from perfectly good healthcare facilities of curable diseases. Children are having kidney problems, because of a lack of clean water. That's what we're talking about. That's what Gaza is, and that's a reflection on what Israel is.
Well, and then an example too is I remember when I was a kid, I used to hear about Deir Yassin and all these places, and Benny Begin and all his guys. Those were basically just death squads and militias that morphed into the IDF. Is that correct?
Yes, the Haganah, in which my father was an officer, the Begins, what they call the Irgun, and all the other groups. Of course, they were terrorist organizations who went and pillaged and destroyed and raped and massacred and burned down towns and villages throughout Palestine for an entire year, all of 1948. That's what that was. Mm-hmm. One long, horrifying ethnic cleansing and genocidal campaign.
Well, see, and then go ahead.
I was going to say that the documents are only now beginning, or new documents are surfacing. New mass graves are coming up. New stories about massacres and horrifying stories from towns and villages all across Palestine, from the very north all the way down to Galilee, all the way south to the Mecca.
Right.
We hear horrifying new stories, things that we didn't even know yet that are being revealed right now. So it was a horrifying, and that evolved. You're right. These terrorist squads morphed into the IDF, which I believe is just a big terrorist organization.
Right. Well, and this is the thing that angers me so much when Trump declared Jerusalem the capital of Israel. And even Bernie Sanders, who was against that idea in the early 90s, wholesale supports that idea now. And last I checked, he didn't even go to the AIPAC meeting this year. So why is a guy like him just completely blanket supporting Israel? I know he's got family that lives there, but that doesn't mean you've got to be a Zionist, right? So why the flip with a guy like that? Or a lot of Jews like that? What is the support? Because that's an ultimate fuck you to the Palestinian people, to make Jerusalem the wholesale capital of Israel when no other country at the time was recognizing Jerusalem as the capital of Israel.
Not just to the Palestinian people, to the entire Arab and Muslim world.
Yeah.
I remember 10 years ago, people talked about the possibility as insanity that one day maybe America, because every president promised to do it. And everybody said, oh my goodness, that's an impossibility, because the reaction in the Arab and Muslim world, it is such an insult and an outrageous thing to do, besides the fact that it violates international law and United Nations resolution. But it happened. The sky didn't fall. The Arab and Muslim world really didn't do anything. And there was condemnation. There was a conference in Istanbul, but there was nothing, no big deal. And Israel is very happy, and the Palestinians are just, they're protesting and so forth, but there's really nothing outrageous that's happening. There's no reason to say, well, that was a terrible mistake. We know it was a terrible mistake, and the consequences are horrifying. And we also know that the number of children who have been detained and tortured since then, just in the first 6 months since that happened, that was December of 2017, it tripled. Because now the Israelis are even more emboldened. The Israeli security services, called security, they're not security services, the terrorism squad, are even more emboldened now to act and do as they please, because they got this gift for nothing. They got this gift, they got several gifts since then, but that was the big one. And if America recognized Jerusalem as the capital of Israel and moved the embassy, then we're doing everything right. So that's now why does somebody like why is somebody like Bernie Sanders still a Zionist? Because I don't think it occurs to any American politician not to be a Zionist, and I think the process is going to be, what this is going to lead to is that in the coming years, all of these people are going to look back and they're going to be sorry and ashamed that they remain Zionist all the time, because being a Zionist is supporting apartheid.
Right. Well, and then see, and this is what frustrates me, is because you're talking to either the so-called liberal or conservative, which is basically almost the same thing these days, and they'll come up with these tropes, basic bullshit that they heard on MSNBC or Fox or whatever, which is almost the same thing as far as this issue is concerned. And they're like, well, if they wouldn't come to the fence, or if they wouldn't build tunnels and all this crap. And you have to try to explain to somebody, not even 1948, but back beyond that. You know what I mean? Like, and their attitude, that the first thing they come back with is, oh, well, Palestine was never a country. Well, for 500 years, when the Ottomans had everything, none of those places were a country. Syria wasn't a country. Iran wasn't a country. No, nothing was a country. It was all territory to the Turks. And so, when they make that claim, oh, well, they were just a territory. Everybody was a territory before the Ottomans fell. So after everyone got their borders and everything else, I mean, how does that narrative get lost? I mean, I know it's 100 years ago and people can't remember last week, but how does that narrative get lost? And you can actually dehumanize an entire people, and with the help of the Arabs, they're complicit too. As long as they got theirs, they're okay. And you don't need a conspiracy for this. You just need people to act in the interest of their own peer group. Like you said, 10 years ago, 15 years ago, I heard this chatter about Jerusalem becoming a capital. And just like you said, the sky would fall and the Arabs would freak out. And they didn't. They're all getting their money. They're all cool. And I'm Palestinian on my dad's side, so I've dealt with a lot of crap my whole life. But one of the things I noticed when I was in college was, Palestinians aren't even regarded, among other Arabs as Arab. You know what I mean? Like, it's almost like we're the wetback of the Middle East. Like, there's just no empathy. They're like, it's almost like they use the Palestinians as a needle in the Israeli side in the 70s and a couple of times here and there, but they really don't. It doesn't seem like they really give a shit about the well-being of the Palestinian people at all.
Yeah, well, it's interesting when they talk about the history. If there's one country in that area that actually has been recognized and has been called by the name Palestine, um, as long as there has been a history of the world, it is Palestine. That piece of land between the Jordan River and the Mediterranean has been referred to as Palestine or Palestine or Palestina at least for 3,000 years.
Right. Absolutely.
Documented.
Right.
Talking about Greek historians, Herodotus. I mean, Greek historians, Roman historians, Byzantines, of course, the Arabs, the Muslims, the Ottomans. This idea that there was never a Palestine is such an absurdly ignorant claim. Now, why does it stick? It sticks because nobody bothers to check. Somebody that doesn't know anything hears from somebody else who doesn't know anything, something, and then that becomes the truth.
But
there's a great book. There's a great book out which I strongly recommend,
right.
which is called Palestine: A 4,000-Year History. It demonstrates clearly that Palestine was Palestine, and this piece of land was called Palestine, going back almost 4,000 years. So that claim doesn't hold water at all. And you're right, when no states were actually states. They were all part of something else, and that's how the whole world was, But it's really troubling. When you talk to what you said about how Palestinians are being treated by others in the Middle East and by other Arabs, I think it's important to differentiate between the regimes which are beholden to America and to Israel, and are therefore supporting Israel and America, and people who, by and large, support the Palestinians.
Well,
now it's problematic because supporting the Palestinians is tough.
Wait, say that.
They still do.
Say that last part again. That supporting the Palestinians is
supporting the Palestinians is tough.
Yeah.
Because you're always defending something that everybody else is saying is bad, and so that's very problematic. It's very difficult.
Well, see, and so I mean, we emailed back and forth a little bit before we started talking today, and and I had a question when you said you wanted to talk about the Levant a little bit. Excuse me, or is it just Levant?
Yeah, the Levant.
The Levant.
Yeah.
So
the Levant is like the Eastern Mediterranean, the Eastern coast of the Mediterranean, Turkey, Syria, Lebanon, Palestine, and so on.
Oh, was the division of that a result of Sykes-Picot?
Well, Sykes-Picot was a division between empires and colonizers to divide the lands that they conquered after World War I. I mean, and who gets what? Who gets the spoils? And so, that's problematic in itself, because who are these white Europeans who think they have a right to come anywhere in the world? And they did the same thing in Africa too. You look at the boundaries of all of the African countries; they make absolutely no sense. They're divided based on the interest of the colonizers, which is why Africa is still in dire situation today, all these years later.
Right.
And the Middle East too. I mean, when you look at the way Iraq, Syria, Lebanon, all these divisions, Palestine, certainly Jordan never existed. Jordan was part of Palestine.
Right.
And so that's what they did. They came in and they thought they could do these things. And then at one point, of course, they said, well, we can give these European Jews Palestine. Why not? Who cares? I mean, it was settler colonialism 101 and imperialism 101 to decide, white European racists giving other white European racists somebody else's country. That's really what the Balfour Declaration is.
Yeah.
And that, of course, is very, very troubling. And what's troubling is that people think that that's when the history began, and they don't realize, Palestine has been a Muslim and Arab country for over 1,500 years. The Muslim, the architecture, the culture, the religion, the monuments. Now, there have always been other communities there as well, Jewish and different, denominations of Christianity, and they've lived in tolerance and peace and, throughout the centuries, under the Muslim and Arab rule. Until the Zionists and the British came, and then, of course, all hell broke loose, and there's violence and trouble. But the reality is that what happened over the last 1,500 years matters.
Right.
And with the Zionist and the pro-Zionist kind of ideology and politics, tries to claim is that nothing important happened over the last 1,500 years or 2,000 years. The Jews were there, and then they came back, and it's their land, and God gave them the land, and leave me alone. This is way too complicated. That's really how this conversation is being conducted.
Well, see, and to speak to that just for a hot second, to get back to the mainstream argument, people act as though, because the number one argument they'll say is, well, they were never a government. Well, yeah, they were. Maybe not a government in the sense of the white European imperialist colonialists, but they were governing themselves. They had. They collected taxes. They had law enforcement. They had, like you said, monuments and lived together with Christians in Bethlehem and Jews in whatever. And so, where does that argument come from? That they were never a government. Well, neither was fucking Syria or Lebanon for 5 or 8.
Wait a minute. But neither was Israel. Israel was never a country and never a government.
Right.
Ever. So what's the
okay? But they'll go back.
The argument.
But they'll go back and they'll say King David was the king of Israel. So
no, he wasn't. That's not history. That's mythology.
Okay.
It's like saying Zeus was the king of Greece. It's absurd. You know what I mean? It's the exact same rationale, like saying Zeus was the king of Greece, and therefore God knows what. I don't know what. I mean, it's mythology. If people want to talk mythology, they can talk mythology. The point is, no, like you said, there were no states. There was no Israel. But there was a Palestine. Because in the 18th century, there was Daher al-Omar, who was kind of a local king, and he ruled most of Palestine. And then there was Al-Jazar, who continued. So for about 100 years, throughout the 18th century, actually, there was a Palestinian entity, and who governed, and they were quite independent of the Ottoman Empire.
Right.
I mean, they were part of the Ottoman Empire, and they sent them taxes, but they were independent and they were united. And then, of course, World War I happened, and everything fell apart. But I mean, it's a completely crazy notion. It's like saying somebody at one point tweeted that can't be a Palestine because there's no P in Arabic, and I said, well, so there's no such thing as Jews because there's no J in Hebrew. There is no J in Hebrew, so how can there be Jews?
Oh my God!
And how can there be a Jerusalem? When people get to that level of ignorance,
yeah.
Then it's time to stop the conversation.
Yeah,
There's really no point in continuing the argument.
See, this is why
complete stupidity.
And this is why you're morally and genetically superior to myself, because I don't. I just keep going, and then I get more frustrated, and I know I just.
It's like junk. It's like junk.
Yes, it is. Yeah, absolutely, it is.
It makes you feel like crap, but you eat it anyway.
You eat it anyway.
Exactly
that's right. I really want that Egg McMuffin, even though I know the pork is made out of Martians, but I don't care. I'm going to eat it anyway. But so then moving forward, because after the Sykes-Picot Agreement and everything, it was the Zionists were having a hard time to get a mandate to turn and the Europeans weren't even buying in the beginning, because they're like, why am I going to leave Europe and go to the desert with a bunch of Bedouins? Who cares? I mean, I'd rather stay in Munich and dig the opera. And so obviously but there was strife and there was terrorism going on throughout the late 20s and 30s, correct?
Yeah, but this was all initiated and stirred up by the Zionists.
Mm-hmm.
The first act of terrorism, the first political assassination in Palestine in the 20th century was by the Zionists assassinating an Orthodox Jew by the name of Jacob Dehan, who was an Orthodox Jewish journalist, and he was on his way from Jerusalem. He was about to leave Jerusalem and go to Europe. It was 1924, and he was campaigning to get the Brits to rescind the Balfour Declaration. The night before he was supposed to leave Jerusalem, Haganah assassinated him. This is 1924.
Mm-hmm.
And they went on and on and on and on and stirred and stirred and stirred and stirred and created violence and terrorism. And in the year 1900, Zionism was very new. It was really still barely on its feet. All the rabbis of the Orthodox world, of the Jewish world, came out with a book that they published in Hebrew. This is pre-World War II. There were millions of Jews in Poland, in Hungary, and in the Arab world, of course, in Yemen, in North Africa, and so forth. And they all agreed when they put out this book, warning about Zionism. And they said Zionism will bring violence to the Holy Land. Zionism will ruin the good relations between Jews and Arabs and Jews and Muslims. And Zionism will create, this idea of a Jewish state will create a serious problem for Jews in all the countries where they live, because people will doubt their loyalty. Were they loyal to the country in which they live, or this new strange entity. So as early as 1900, Orthodox Jewish rabbis knew that this was going to be a disaster and it was going to bring violence and terrorism. And like you said, the 20s, the 30s, the 40s, and then 1948 was one big, the whole Nakba, the whole Palestinian catastrophe was an act of terrorism.
Right.
Massive act of terrorism that was allowed to proceed uninterrupted, So this was all brought in by the Zionism. Even today, when they say, look at Hamas. Hamas has kept and religiously to every agreement it signed with Israel. Israel violated every ceasefire.
Right.
And when people dare to talk about Hamas targeting civilians, that's also, it's absurd. When Ahmed Yassin, the founder of Hamas, is still alive, he's an old paraplegic and school teacher, actually, who lived in a refugee camp his whole life. And when he was arrested by the Israelis, the Israelis came up to him and asked him to tell his people to stop targeting civilians. This is in the 90s. And he said, bring an agreement to me right now that both sides promise not to target civilians. I will sign it now. No problem. Both sides committing to stop targeting a civilian. Israel was not interested. Israel refused. Israel would not want to sign agreements with him to stop targeting civilians. And of course, we know Israel has killed thousands of more civilians, Palestinian civilians, than the Palestinians that have targeted and killed Israeli civilians.
Right.
But, the terrorism, the entire violence, all of the violence and the terrorism, well, I think it's all terrorism, has been initiated, and the lion's share of the violence has been committed by Israel, not by the Palestinians, by any means.
Well, see, and that's something when people give me that same crap about Hamas and Hezbollah, I'm like, if it wasn't for Hezbollah, Lebanon would have been annexed by now.
Well, first of all, you can even get a step before that. If it wasn't for the Israeli occupation, there would be no Hamas or Hezbollah. They were both created as resistance organization to the Israeli occupation.
Right.
So if there was no occupation and oppression, neither one of them would have been created. They were created as a resistance. They were created as a response to the Israeli oppression and the Israeli occupation.
Right.
And the atrocities, years and years and years of atrocities by the Israelis, both in southern Lebanon and in Palestine, of course.
Right.
That's how they came out. That's what happens when you oppress people, when you commit atrocities against the people. At one point, they will stand up, and it took them a long time. Palestinians were not fast to respond with armed resistance. They try everything else, and now, of course, we know that there's BDS, which is the Palestinian Initiative. So this is the reality. Zionism has been responsible for decades of violence and terrorism in Palestine and in Lebanon. And it's time to bring it to a stop. And the only way to bring it to a stop is to declare clearly that Zionism is an illegitimate ideology. The state of Israel, as it is an illegitimate regime and should be replaced with a democracy with equal rights. And I believe the way to move forward in terms of resisting Israel and resisting the racism and the apartheid is following the demand that the Palestinians gave us, the Palestinian call for boycott, divestment, and sanctions. They are the oppressed people by this system, and they are calling on us to act, and this is what they want us to do. So we need to listen to them because they're smart. They know what they're talking about.
Well, let me ask you something really quick, too. So, and we talked about this before. Obviously, the idea of a two-state solution is a fallacy. I mean, just on its face, if anyone's paying attention at all. If they were to, integrate the Palestinians, it goes so far as reparations even, and allow the right to return, and create a genuine one-state democracy where people are coexisting in peace, do you think the Palestinians would be cool with still living in Israel, or would they want it to be called Palestine?
Well, if we have a state with equal rights and we implement the right of return, which I believe is a right that cannot be denied, and Palestinians have a right to return and should return, and we have fair and free elections, one person, one vote, then the people will vote and decide for themselves, and there will be a majority. I doubt that. I doubt that it could be called Israel. It's like South Africa cannot be called apartheid anymore. Israel is the equivalent of apartheid. It's just that it's a prettier name. It's not as ugly as apartheid, but it means the same thing. So, I mean, they could have a vote, and they can say, fine, we need to vote on a constitution. We need to vote on a name. We need to vote on a flag. We need to vote on all kinds of, the symbols of this new creation. There's never been a democracy with equal rights, one person, one vote. The Palestinians could enjoy. I mean, Israeli Jews have their own democracy within Palestine, when Palestinians are excluded. So the minute you have a state which includes everyone, then they will vote and decide all of these things as free and fair elections. And then it will be the first time that the Palestinians had a right, actually, as equals, to decide their own fate. And that will be a very interesting exercise. I doubt it would be called Israel very much, but it's going to be up to the people to vote and make a decision.
See, man, and this is where I get kind of. I remember last year we were talking in one of the shows you did, and you specifically said, "Hey, listen, South Africa, they changed, and I don't see these guys. I don't see this happening with these guys. And the thing that amazes me is you guys just came out of a Holocaust not 3 years before, right? You.
No, we didn't. None of us came out of the Holocaust. Very few Israelis had anything to do with the Holocaust. Very few Israelis had anything to do with all.
Wait,
Israelis are not oppressed people.
Wait, you mean the Israeli Jews, or the European Jews rather, that came to Palestine from Europe after the World War II?
Very few.
Okay.
Came after World War II.
Okay, expound on that.
It's a myth. After World War II, there were about 2 million Jewish refugees in Europe, scattered all over the place, and very, very few, less than 10%. Actually immigrated to what became Israel. And many of them left because there were all kinds of reasons, the whole of the story, but many of them left. So the vast majority of Israelis are not and have no connection to the Holocaust, and their parents and grandparents were not Holocaust survivors. The vast majority of Israelis were never persecuted Israelis were never persecuted by anyone. Whether or not their grandparents were at some point by some regime, that's the whole of the story. But the whole Holocaust thing is a myth. Israelis are not. And Israel is not the response. The vast majority of Holocaust survivors did not go to what became Israel. They either went home to their countries, or they went to America or England or somewhere else.
Right.
They did not come to, and Israel was, the Zionists were shocked actually, but they were not interested to come to this, and they could see for what it was. So if there was a statement by Jews that Israel is not the right thing for Jews, it is the fact that the very survivors, the ones who suffered the worst persecution Jews have ever survived, which is the Holocaust, chose not to go. And in the United States, by the way, the largest anti-Zionist Jewish community in the United States are the Orthodox Jews of the Satsmer community, which is the one particular group within the ultra-Orthodox Jews. They are all anti-Zionist, and they are all survivors, or they come from the children and grandchildren of survivors of Auschwitz. And they are the largest anti-Zionist, as the bloc, anti-Zionist Jewish group in the world. And we're talking about hundreds of thousands. It's a massive community, a huge community. And they exist here, they exist in the UK, some of them are in Palestine. And like I said, they are survivors of Auschwitz, and they are the largest anti-Zionist Jewish group in the world. So again, this whole connection between Israel and the Holocaust is complete mythology. It's a complete fallacy. It's not true.
So the Ashkenazi that came to Israel, were they just a bunch of Ukrainians, or who were most of those white Europeans that did go to Israel? Who were they?
Well, throughout the 20th century, Jews immigrated. In the beginning, it was mostly from Central and Eastern Europe. Some came from Western Europe, but mostly Central and Eastern Europe. And then the vast majority are descendants of Jews who came from Arab countries. The vast majority of Israelis are actually Arabs because their parents came from Arab countries. They're Arab Jews, and they came after the state was established. And again, the Arab Jews were not interested in Zionism, were not interested in coming. They were quite happy in Iraq. In Baghdad, the community had a history of at least 1,000 years, maybe more. North Africa, Morocco, all throughout the, Morocco, Algeria, Libya, there are Jewish communities there, Yemen. But the Zionists went in and started causing trouble.
Right.
The Zionists went in and on the one hand started causing trouble, on the other hand making promises that Israel is this, paradise, and that they would live with they would get wonderful conditions and so on and so forth, lying to their teeth. So in the end, in many cases, they had no choice but to leave. In some cases, they left and they wish they hadn't. But these are, today, the majority of Israelis are actually Arabs because they came from Arab countries.
Right.
And they're Jews, but they're Arab Jews.
Right. No, in LA, I had quite a few Iraqi and Iranian Jewish friends in LA. So yeah, absolutely.
Well, yeah, and the thing is, these are things that, again, within the community, people know it. Although what Israel's trying to show now is that the Arab Jews also suffered a Holocaust. So now they're pushing forward this agenda with the Israeli Education Ministry about what they call the Mizrahi, because they don't say Arab, of course. They say the Mizrahi Jewish Holocaust, which is, again, a complete lie, a complete myth.
Okay.
But that's what happened. So again, there's no Holocaust. The Holocaust had nothing to do with Israel, and Israel had nothing to do with the Holocaust. The ethnic cleansing campaign was planned well before the Holocaust. And like I said, once again, Israelis were never prosecuted. Most Israelis had nothing to do with the Holocaust whatsoever.
Right. Well, but then the UN, but wasn't the Holocaust used as an excuse for Britain and the UN to mandate a state of Israel in the UN partition of 1947?
It helped. Well, that was something that, of course, Israel utilized a great deal after the Holocaust, and after, in pushing for what they call the partition plan, which was the plan to create a Jewish state on half or 60% of Palestine. Of course, the fact that this was on the heels of the Holocaust, made a big difference. The Jews had a serious argument, and the Zionists knew how to use the Holocaust very well in order to pressure the world to accept this idea of a Jewish state. But again, the Jews that were there, very few of them were survivors of the Holocaust. The vast majority of survivors of the Holocaust had no interest in this creation, and for good reason.
Because I know Germany does pay reparations to Jews in Israel, do they not?
Yes, Germany and Poland and some of the other.
Right.
Yes, they've been paying a lot of money as reparations. Yes.
Now, to specific people and families, or just to the government as a whole?
That's the thing. They pay it to the government.
Oh.
People themselves are now very old and very poor, and the government won't give them their money. But that's a whole other issue. But the money went to the government.
See, and this will piss.
This is a huge economic boost in the 1950s that allowed Israel to sustain itself and continue to, not fade away. Was suddenly all these millions of dollars were coming in from Germany, and that boosted the economy. Suddenly Israel had money because there was, the country there was no engine, and there were very few Jews.
See, and there's this commercial I keep seeing, if I'm up late watching television, there's this commercial I keep seeing for the Israeli Christian Jewish Holocaust Survivor Fund. Oh, these people are so starving, and no one, they need your food. I'm going, well, I don't mean to say this in a crude anti-Semitic way, because I'm not anti-Semitic. I don't hate Jews, but I'm just like, fuck you guys. You guys got a $5 billion a year defense industry with a country of 6 million people. We still pump $3 billion a year into you people. You can't feed these guys? You want $25 from some guy a month to feed a homeless person in the Ukraine? I mean, it's just it blows my mind.
Yes, you're not the target audience. I know exactly what you're talking about. It's called the Christian Jewish Alliance.
Right, that's what it is. Yeah.
And it's when you land at Tel Aviv Airport, you know how you walk through these jetties, the jetty thing that connects the plane to the gate. Yep. They are lined with commercials, with posters by this alliance, which creates this image. And I've heard their spiel on the radio when I'm driving to LA many times. And they are saying all these poor Jews are getting on planes and they're being saved and they're coming to Israel, and these poor Russian Jews and these poor. I'm going, what? There are plane loads of Jews coming? How come I never heard of this? So I called them up. And I said, I'd love to go see these planes. Where are they? I don't want to be there. I want to greet them. Where are they? Well, they hung up on me.
Right.
It's a complete lie. It's a complete fallacy, and they are making millions and millions of dollars that they're giving to Israel. It's one of these. I don't even know what to call it. I mean, it's one of the biggest scams I've ever
It's
seen.
a shell company. It's a shell company. It's a bullshit shell company where they take $25. Yeah, they take $25 from suckers in the Midwest watching Hogan's Heroes or something in the middle of the night, and then they show these old hungry people or whatever, and they go, "Won't you help?" Like it's a March of Dimes Christian Children's Fund thing. And every time I see that commercial, I'm like,
but this is in L.A. This is in L.A. I hear them in L.A. all the time. They have a radio station.
Oh my God.
And they have some rabbi and some priest or something, and they talk about it. And it's in L.A. First time I heard them was driving through L.A.
See, and I'm like, fuck you guys. Your economy is fine. You can afford to feed these people. You don't need $25 from Joe Schmo in L.A. or some poor Baptist minister or whatever in Montana. It's a total scam. It's a shell. It's a shell organization.
Well, the whole. That's just that's a scam. That's a scam. The entire foreign aid package in Israel is a scam. Israel doesn't need $3.8 billion a year. Israel doesn't need it. It's a rich country.
Yeah.
Israeli soldiers can swim in $100 bills.
Yes.
They can light their cigarettes with $100 bills. They have so much money. They have more money than they know what to do with. Why do they need $3.8 billion from American taxpayers when it's a rich country and there's no reason for it. It's a big scam. It's a big freaking sleazy scam. It's terrible. There's no justification for it, because and they operate like a mafia. I mean, American representatives of the House of Representatives members and senators and what have you vote for this because they have to. They're being blackmailed. It's like the Israeli lobby and the gun lobby. They operate like a mafia. And that's how they get what they get. And it's talking about billions of dollars that Israel does not need and certainly doesn't deserve.
Oh, no shit. Well, I mean, it's bribery, isn't it? Because it's the money that they got out of Camp David in the 70s to play ball with Israel or Egypt and Jordan.
Yeah.
Right? I mean, Jordan gets a couple of billion. Israel.
Yeah, that was the best. Not Jordan, Egypt, but yeah.
Oh, I thought Jordan got money too, because I know Egypt got
Jordan got money later. It wasn't Camp David. It was a different scam. That's a third scam.
Okay.
But Camp David was Egypt and Israel. And Egypt, which is a country of 80 million people, is getting less than Israel, which is a country of 12 million, out of which only 6 million are getting the money because only the Jews are getting it. So in other words, it's absurd. Why is Israel getting all this money? If you're going to give more money, give it to the poorer country, the bigger, poorer country, right?
Right.
But it makes no sense. It's one big crazy scam that's operating on this on these illusions and myths that nobody dares to challenge. I mean, you do. You've got the show, obviously, or that's what you're doing. But somebody asked me the other day. I was interviewed somewhere about this kid that was just shot in the head from Kufr Kadum, and they said to me, "Why doesn't the mainstream media report this?" I said, "Well, the mainstream media doesn't care about this. What's to them a dead Palestinian kid? They don't care. People don't care. People in the white civilized world do not care about another Palestinian kid being shot and killed."
Mm. No, they don't. Actually, they don't. And I mean, listen, how many Haitians got, how many Rwandans were murdered, beheaded with machetes? We didn't give a shit. But we gave a crap about white European Muslims in the 90s, right? All of a sudden, it was ethnic cleansing was terrible, and even that's a fallacy. Yeah. But I mean, but it was enough to sell a war, But brown Muslims, fuck it. I mean, we are an imperialist colonialist deal. We always have been, and I mean, it sounds cynical. I just don't think that's ever going to change. I can scream to the top of my lungs. I probably will because I have issues. But honestly, moving forward. How, I mean, and you do this all the time. So how educate's a bad word. It's such a soft fucking word. Like, how do you make people see that we're living a lie? The rest of the world sees what's going on, then they're too chicken shit to do anything about it. The UN will pass resolution after resolution. Nothing ever gets enforced. What do we do moving forward?
Well, what we do moving forward is we make sure that the conversation is alive and robust. We make sure that this show of yours and others like it are, posted and shared and reposted so people hear this. We make sure that we talk to our friends and neighbors and relatives and make sure that whether it's a book they should read, my book, Papa's book, like I said, Nur Masalha's book about 4,000-year history of Palestine, which is a wonderful, wonderful book. We make sure that people are, become, well, like we're educated, so at least informed. We send them a video, a lecture, my lecture, Ilan Papa's lecture, a Palestinian, Ali Abu Naim. I mean, there's so many things out there on YouTube, so available on social media, Electronic Intifada, Mondo Wife, Minch Press News, which I write for.
I read your articles.
I mean, there's so much stuff. There's so much stuff that's available. We just need to make sure that we get this into the hands of more and more people. And, things are like, we talked about it at the beginning of the show. I mean, there is a change. Things are developing, but they're moving very, very slow. And Palestine is being destroyed and Palestinians are being killed very, very fast. Very fast. And much faster pace than ever before. And before we know it, when we look at the makeup of the Israeli government today, we see the people who want to destroy Al-Aqsa Mosque and the Dome of the Rock and build the Jewish temple there. They are sitting in the cabinet, in the security cabinet, which is kind of the inner circle of the Israeli government. And that's what these people talk about. So if we do not act soon, I would say we need to treat Palestine like it's a patient that's bleeding to death fast. We don't need to stand there and express solidarity. We need to get in there and we need to apply first aid, emergency care. And that emergency care, I believe, is a demand for boycott, a demand for sanctions, immediate sanctions. Demand that the Sixth Fleet go to Gaza and help the Palestinians and save Palestinians from dying and provide care and humanitarian relief immediately. And impose a no-fly zone over Palestine so Israeli planes cannot fly there and bomb. And demand that the siege on Gaza be released, all political prisoners, children be released from prison. Demand that the military regime be dismantled. These things are things that we need to demand, and we need to demand them clearly at the top of our voices and not be flippant or hesitant to say these things. Because the things are happening very quickly and the situation in Palestine is terrible. Yeah. It's beyond terrible. Palestinians are being killed and the country is being destroyed as we speak. Monuments, mosques, monuments that have a 2,000-year history. If they're not Jewish, they're gone.
Right.
Churches, again, mosques, all kinds of buildings. You name it. Anything that shows the wonderful, rich Arab and Muslim history, Christian history of the country are being destroyed, demolished, allowed to fall apart. So we need to act. I think that we need to talk about boycott, divestment, and sanctions and make sure our representatives know that they must support Ilhan Omar's bill to enshrine the rights of Americans to boycott. And they must support, I think it's called 2407. It's Benny McCollum's bill about the rights of children. These are things that are crucially important for our representatives to know, that we demand that they need to know that if they don't do this now, they're going to be remembered like the politicians who called Nelson Mandela terrorists.
Right.
There were politicians that even in the 80s, late in the late 80s, people still called him a terrorist and refused to boycott South Africa. These will be remembered just like those people. And today those people are hiding in shame under some chair, under the sofa. They won't open their mouth. Right. But they did that. So these politicians today need to know that we're going to remember them and shame them because they are the same.
Well, man, sir, I appreciate you coming on the show, man. It's always awesome to get you.
I appreciate the opportunity. Thank you.
No problem. I mean, I'd love to have you come back on again at a later date, and just every time you grace us with your presence, man, it's an honor. Seriously, I've been following you for a while before we even met for this show. You're a phenomenal human being. I just really respect you, folks.
Appreciate it. Thank you.
Man, seriously, folks. The show's about it, but our guest has been Miko Peled, again, author of The General Son, Journey of an Israeli in Palestine, and Injustice, the story of the Holy Land Foundation 5. You can find his books on Amazon.com, and also the name of your publisher is?
Just World Book.
Okay, awesome. And then, folks, again, you can find us on patreon.com/The Bitter Truth, and this stuff makes you uncomfortable. It's supposed to. Sleep tight.